Hi, I'm here with Christopher Jackson, one of the new professors in our department. And here we are in this course called Dynamic Planet. And in order to kind of wrap up this semester, I thought it would be really nice to get his perspective on how all these different components of the Earth's climate system that we've been talking about this semester, the atmosphere, the cryosphere, the hydrosphere and the lithosphere and the biosphere all kind of tied in together, get his perspective and learn a little bit more about him. So first, thanks and welcome, Chris.
Hi, thank you, David. Yeah, no, it's nice to be. Well, I was going to say it's nice to be here, but I'm sort of here and you're there. But this is the world we live in now.
Yeah, well, we're very pleased to have you here in the department. So, as I mentioned, many of the modules that the first year students have been taking this year relate to how all these different components of the climate system come together. How has your research informed our understanding of climates, paleoclimates, the future, whatever?
Yeah, I think I guess I've had I've been amazed, I guess, in my career by looking at rocks. We can understand so much about how climate has changed because it's not the thing that's most immediately taught to you in geosciences. And I'm guessing if you do climatology or meteorology, it's not that link to the lithosphere and the link to the sedimentary record is not one that's immediately made. So that has been a nice realization during my career. And I guess it's really quite fundamental. When I go out in the field and look at rocks, or whenever I look at drill core recovered from beneath the ocean, so beneath the seabed, and you see changes in things like the color of the rocks, or you see changes in the composition of the rocks, the grain sizes, you see changes between clastic rocks and carbonate rocks, so rocks that are formed through the death of things that previously were living. In that record is a change of is the fingerprint of the changing climate. So, for example, when I've done work in deep water basins, so deep water sedimentary basins, these are basins which have water depths of maybe a couple of kilometers, and the sediments are deposited primarily by sediment gravity currents, so submarine landslides, or fine grained sediment that settles out of suspension. When we've done work on that sort of those sorts of sequences in places like Argentina, the signature of a changing climate is often revealed in the changing composition of the rocks we're looking at. So one really good example is a time in the geological record when we know from other evidences that the sea level was rising, but we see an increase in sandstone rather than mudstone in the basin. And that's been driven by an increase in runoff. So more powerful rivers, therefore capable of bringing coarser grains into the same deep water. So we've been looking at kind of deconvolving that signal, right? Because we know from other proxies that sea level is rising, but in our local sedimentary record, we have this evidence of a giant influx of sand, and we know that tectonically the basin was quite quiet. So therefore the culprit is climate in that case. So, it's all around us, really.
And I suppose that if you're looking at a longer record, even you may even have to deal with the fact that the paleo location that this site was on may have changed. So the climate itself may not have changed, but the site may have went from one climate zone to another. So that adds yet a third kind of thing that you have to deconvolve out of that.
Yeah, your basins aren't static, are they? Plate tectonics means that the sample site you're looking at has probably been at one latitude and then migrated to another one over, tens to more likely hundreds of millions of years. So that doesn't tell you anything about the stability of the climate. It tells you about the instability of the basin you're looking at.
Cool. Yeah. And so how did you get started in your career, and kind of how did this evolution in your life happen to where you said, okay, well, I enjoyed this so much, or professor is my calling?
Yeah, no, I was interested in everything as a kid. I wasn't particularly STEM focused. I wasn't particularly obsessed about rocks and fossils and volcanoes and geology. I kind of stumbled into it mainly via physical geography, actually. That it was one of the things I found most interesting was geography and the physical aspect of that. And then through just being not so good at all the other things compared to geology, I eventually, I don't know if it was really my calling. It was something that it increasingly appealed to me because it was interesting, it was useful, and I had more of a skill at understanding rocks than I did, Shakespeare or some aspect of history or something. So eventually I found it that way. And then it's been, yeah, I'm still on that journey at the moment as an academic of finding new ways of applying, geoscience skills to a range of different things, climate change being one of those things. And I think that's a real privilege and a pleasure to feel that you're constantly rediscovering value in what you've learned, and the reason you maybe chose something before may change as people are bringing you new challenges to work on.
That's certainly true. My career, I think, as a child, I kind of always knew that it would be some kind of science that I would go into. But and then probably by the time I was in high school, I started to solidify that earth science of some type was really what I wanted to go into. And I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, which is underlain by a lot of coal mines, and that was a big industry in our area. And in fact, my elementary school doesn't exist anymore because it fell into all the holes that they dug around the neighborhood. So so this idea, if I wanted to do something with earth science, but I had this very narrow view of geology as something that, you'd only get a job in this coal or oil and gas
Yeah.
industry. And as someone who enjoyed being outdoors, and, that didn't really appeal to me. And so my career path took me more towards meteorology. And, I revisited that in college, and came back to geology, taking a lot of courses. But I think ultimately I knew I wanted to be a meteorologist.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of scared me off, thinking that, I just had this limited view of what a geologist did as someone who did oil and gas, rather than going out and looking at trilobites or
it's far broader.
Understanding structure.
Yeah, it's far broader than I think we historically have been aware of. Or there's always probably been a subset of geoscientists who knew that the calling was much broader than that. But I think it's to do with then the messaging and some of the students watching this video, there are still jobs in the fossil fuel-based energy economy, of course, but there are also lots of amazing other jobs you can do as a geoscientist, which will excite you and have a real societal impact.
Yeah, I think, had I known about some of these things that would evolve into my career, like paleoclimate modeling, like, understanding fossils at a much deeper level through some of the imaging techniques that, people in our department are pioneering, I might I might have stuck into that geology path myself. So, I see, your Twitter feed, and you're out enjoying the outdoors and that, is that a struggle for you to say, I've been funded and I've worked with the fossil fuel industry over, these years.
Yeah.
And yet, I also enjoy seeing a pristine natural environment.
Yeah, it's a struggle, but I think everybody has to go through a struggle at some time in your life, because, from struggle can come realization, and everybody's obviously entitled to change their mind. And in fact, that's what we want, of course, isn't it? We want to be able to influence people positively for a better future for all. And, I think probably before, when I was younger, I didn't really think so much about it, because, let's not forget, 40 years ago, fossil fuel hunters were the heroes, really. We were trying to continue the Industrial Revolution. We needed more energy in more places, and therefore we needed this, and the fossil fuel energy was the way to go. So people were heralded as heroes, and now obviously we have a better understanding of the impacts. And so when I was younger, I probably was more swept up in the rear wave of that it is, and it still is. Let's not forget it. It's still a very important job to do in certain parts of the world, right? There are still economies in the world which have a right to develop, and those people have a right to be healthy and a right to be educated, and elements of their economy are going to be based on fossil fuels. And to deny them that right, having availed ourselves of that over the last few decades, is problematic from a humanitarian point of view, of course. So I think we need to, so in my mind, I still have some sympathy towards the application of geoscience towards the locating and extraction of fossil fuels, because it is going to be needed as we wish to proceed through the energy transition. We can't just turn off the taps for that now, because there's a lot of jeopardy, and things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals will not be met if we go off that kind of cliff edge. So, before I beat myself up too much about my past and ongoing relationship with the oil industry, I'm still hyper conscious of my desire to have a better future for everybody now, and then try and make a sustainable future for people who come in.
And I guess that leads to, when you came here, you chose the title, Professor of Sustainable Geoscience, rather than saying, well, I'm Professor of, seismic interpretation, or, one of the other, talents that you have, experienced and, that you've demonstrated in the past. So, how does that transition work for you here at Manchester? And, do you have plans then to develop this? What kind of research, teaching do you hope to do here, and contribute to, the workload of us academics here?
I think for me, firstly, I think it's probably important to say that the department and the university chose the title. I think it's important to say that. It wasn't something I said, I want to be called this. They said, well, there's this chair we've got, we're going to call it this. And I think that's a good signal from the university about what they, as an institutional level, were intending to do, and where they wanted to drive future research and teaching. And it was in the area of sustainable geosciences as opposed to petroleum geology, let's say. So I think that's important. And it appealed to me from a selfish point of view, because what it then meant is it forced me to look at the skills and interests I had and look at how they could be refocused towards something else. Now, a lot of the sustainable geoscience work I'm hoping to do, which I'll go on to, it requires an understanding of the structure and evolution of the Earth. And that can be gained either by going in the field or looking at geophysical data like seismic reflection images or borehole data. So there's loads and loads of things that and tools I'm going to be using, which are the same ones I've used before, using a lot of the skills I already have, but focused towards a different cause. So what are those specific things? Well, we were already doing quite a lot of work around submarine landslides, and submarine landslides are tsunamigenic. They can trigger a tsunami. So we were interested in the size and timing and the internal structure within submarine landslides. And that's important if we want to consider safe cities, which is one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, right? So coastal settlements, we need to be able to have ways of understanding what the tsunami risk is for those. And that, my work in the submarine landslides area contributes to that. I'm also, like every kid, obsessed by volcanoes. So we've been doing lots of work around geophysical imaging under ancient volcanoes, which are now buried and extinct, but they do give us a window into how modern active volcanoes behave. So again, that's a geohazard related application, or a geohazard element of sustainable geoscience. And I when I say sustainable geoscience, I in my head, what I mean by that is the application of geosciences to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that could be across a number of those different components, and geohazards and safe cities are one of those. And finally, I think the other thing we've been doing a lot on is normal faulting. So the growth of giant fractures that accommodate stretching of the Earth's crust. And those giant fractures often trigger earthquakes. And those earthquakes are hazardous as well for the obvious reasons. So a lot of my work over the last 2 decades has been focused on looking at the structure of seismogenic faults, but also looking at how they grow over tens of thousands to millions of years. So if we can understand how they've evolved in the past, we might be able to predict or forecast at least how they may behave in the future.
And I guess another component of what you'd like to do here in Manchester is continue the science communication angle and public outreach on the importance of science issues in that regard. And for me, having grown up in the United States, it was rare to see science presented on TV kind of outside the Nova specials once a week on PBS. But here, to see the Royal Institute Christmas lectures be given such prominence and press and emphasis from year to year, in terms of public engagement with science, really impressed me, that, hey, this is something that, society here in the UK takes, it's really important to them, and they put a lot of emphasis on it. And so, I mean, what was it like? I mean, here you are, I mean, you had a, you know, interest in the scientific communication skills
Yeah.
to be given one of the highest, profile types of things, outside of probably David Attenborough or whatever. I mean, what
Yeah.
was it like to be thrown into that spotlight?
It's like I used to play rugby and we used to call it a hospital pass, right? So I don't know if that term translates to you as an American or to this people listening, but it's basically when you're given an opportunity which looks great, but it's actually quite hazardous. So we
Mhm.
call it a hospital pass, and it's a rugby or football term. Um, and what do I mean by that? I mean, it's a great opportunity, but because it's so high profile and because the topic of climate change was so controversial, and then there was all the not insignificant point of me being black, all of those three things got to combine to make it an incredibly important opportunity to get it right. And with the awareness that it was going to attract a lot of attention, so there was additional pressure. And it was an amazing honor to be asked. I mean, I think that was the main thing. I have an interest in science communication, but that typically involves going in to talk to 4 and 5-year-olds in school with a bag of rocks and sort of telling them about geology or boring my own kids around the dinner table about stuff. But science communication can happen in many different ways, remember. And the Royal Institute of Critical Lectures is just one of those. So it was like, okay, what can I do to kind of engage people and excite them about geoscience in particular, but science in general? How can we make science look, how can we make it clear to them that science is relevant to their lives? And I think people were aware of that, weren't they, last year because of COVID, because it was the first time in my living memory where there were so many scientists on TV and people had such an interest in immunology and virology, right? Is that people were starting to realize that science informed policy, and there was a tension at the interface between those two. And I wanted geoscience to have that as well, have its moment in the sun. So it was good, trying to work out how do you balance making sure everything's scientifically accurate and you're not dumbing things down for an audience which spans quite a large age range, but at the same time making it accessible and exciting and engaging and not an intellectual performance of showing off and how clever I was. It was about bringing people along, and the demonstrations that we used helped to do that because it has scientific validity, but it also visually communicates some really fundamental concepts that you're trying to get across to people. So I thought I'd like to think we did it quite well. You can tell me all the.
Well, I mean, I already exchanged some emails with you about
Yeah.
that, after having watched your episode. I mean, at least personally for me, you avoided some pitfalls that I'm glad you didn't fall into. So I was really pleased by that. And to me, I'm happy to see some things that I can get real pedantic over. I don't mind seeing them smoothed over from time to time if you've got a good presentation, if you're making a good point along the way. And I mean, I think you
Yeah,
certainly did.
that's a big hazard, right? So there's always specialists. It's like if I watch a geology TV show, right? Normally I'm watching that not to kind of not to grade the presenter or the production team. It's normally to kind of see some geology on TV from another part of the world, which is kind of awesome, right? But some people do watch those things and kind of with the eye of like, can we trip people up here, and can we? And what people need to understand, and this is perhaps not for this particular audience, but for any students who are watching this who are interested in science communication. Those productions are incredibly hard work. No matter how much planning you do with the script writing and the fact checking and the demos, things will always get lost either in the liveness of the recording itself, or in something to do with the fact checking, or there's disputed science. Of course, you might present one bit of it, and there's another school of thought who thinks something else. So there is always going to be that, but I think that's important because then it does trigger a follow-up discussion around, well, I don't agree with that. I think you should have said this. And I think we have to be, as science communicators, we have to be grown up enough to realize that we're not always going to hit perfectly everything. And then to hope that we've not said anything really, really fundamentally flawed, which has generated panic amongst the public or wildly misinformed the public.
Yeah. And I guess when you think about, the point that, I mean, how long was your episode, and then when you add up the other episodes, I mean, that's a lot, I mean, I was sitting there thinking, my lectures aren't even this long, and yet I expect the students to, remember, key points from what I say. And here you are buzzing through all these different topics that I would say, well, I would need at least 20, 30 minutes to do this, what you did in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then expecting the public to remember,
Yes.
the key points. I mean, to me, that shows the difficulty, the delicate dance that you had to
Yes.
do with the production company, the script, and the demonstrations and everything to have it come out at the end
Yeah.
and be not a
Complete
disorganized
mess.
mess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing people forget is, and lots of some science communicators get given a hard time for this, and I think unfairly. They're not experts in everything, right? So you want to program about the geological record of climate change, and you want to cover geochemistry, paleontology, sedimentology, volcanology. You want to cover all of these things. I don't care what type of climate scientist you are. You probably are not trained to the expert level of any individual in each of those spaces. So what you've got then is somebody who has some scientific validity in those areas, and but more importantly than that, actually has an interest like you as a viewer has, right? So I've got to communicate it clearly and accurately, but equally, I've got to be making it clear to the viewers that I'm not expert in all of these things, but I'm actually learning as I go along. And that's one real powerful aspect of having guests coming in, right? Is you get the experts coming in and then you converse with them. And that then adds a bit more of that dynamic where there's an expert and a slightly less expert person in a dialogue, and the audience are kind of watching that and learning from it as well.
Hmm. So one last question then. Were there any kind of moments that you thought came off really well, or like you said, there was an unexpected glitch in the demonstration and you had to ad lib or improvise something?
Yeah, I'll start with the low light. Well, not the low light. It was kind of a funny low light. Was the carbon store demo with the ping pong balls, where the ping pong balls were kind of going round from the deep Earth store into the atmospheric store, and that machine was brilliantly designed, but was very, very fitful on the day of recording. So you just have to roll with it, and science is important, but it doesn't need to be boring and stiff and straight. It can be humorous. You can bring some light to it. So I thought that was good in a way, although it still gives me nightmares, the ping pong balls flying out of that machine over the floor. And then, I think for me, one bit that really sticks in my mind even now was the string quartet who came in at the end and played the music, which was the climate change, I think, over the last 114 years or so. And they played it from the low latitudes up to the high latitudes, and they translated the climate change into music, and that was very emotive. I thought it was scientifically interesting how they'd gone from the climate record to the pitch and tone of the music, and then how beyond that, they'd sort of arranged it. So I thought that was very poignant as well as being just kind of scientifically very interesting.
No, I agree. I thought that was a really interesting way to present it. I mean, again, as scientists trying to sit there and analyze it and follow the data, it was just so much for my brain to handle. But I think ultimately, I mean, for the lay public, they're just sitting there going, wow, okay, I hear the tones increasing, and that's a very dramatic illustration of the rise in temperature that we've seen graphically, in other very popular, ways of presenting that information. So
no, it was that did stick in my mind as well. And I think all the interactions with the kids as well was just, we had to work hard because we didn't have a live studio audience. So trying to engage with the audience remotely was I thought that was a highlight, that we still managed to do that. And we managed to broaden the kind of group of people who had access to the science in terms of what was going on in the lecture theatre.
Well, great. Thanks again for your time today to come and talk with us. And, I mean, I've had an enjoyment, talking with you by email so far. And I look forward to having you, well, maybe not down the hall for me, but in the cross the road in the other building for me, hopefully when the fall comes around.
Yeah.
So, thanks again, Christopher. We'll see you later.
Thank you, David.
Bye.